"Don't you try to rescue me," she said. The Lakota stepped before the bandits, saying, "Too late now." "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun was setting over the vast plains of Dakota Territory, casting long shadows across the dry earth. A lone figure, a woman dressed in simple, worn clothes, paced nervously in front of a makeshift campfire. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and tonight, she was running for her life. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard the sound of horses approaching in the distance, the unmistakable sound of the bandits closing in. She had tried to escape before, but they always found her. She could feel the weight of her father's debt crushing her, a debt that had led her to this moment. The moment where she would be forced to marry Jake Blackjack Morrison, the most feared outlaw in the Dakota Territory. The thought of it made her stomach turn. She had heard the rumors, how he had burned towns to the ground, how he collected scalps like trophies, how he was a man with no honor. And now, she was to become his bride, a pawn in his ruthless game. Clara's eyes darted around, searching for any possible escape. There was nowhere to run, no one to turn to. Her only option was to face the inevitable. But deep down, she knew she could never marry him. She would rather die than become that man's wife. Just as her mind raced with desperate thoughts, she heard the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. The bandits were closing in. Clara stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle her father had left behind. She wasn't sure if she would be able to use it, but she couldn't just stand there and wait for them to take her. She would fight. But before she could make a move, a tall figure appeared in the distance, silhouetted against the fading light. A Lakota warrior. His presence was commanding, his gaze steady and unyielding. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Who was this man, and what did he want? The Lakota warrior's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, there was a brief, unspoken connection between them. He didn't speak, but his presence alone seemed to promise something more than just survival. Clara's grip on the rifle tightened, but she didn't raise it. The bandits were getting closer, but the warrior stood firm, stepping in front of her, as if to shield her from the inevitable. "Don't you try to rescue me," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of defiance and fear. "Too late now," the Lakota man replied, his voice low but filled with resolve. His words hung in the air, carrying a weight that Clara couldn't quite understand. Was he going to protect her? Or was he another threat she had to face alone? As the bandits drew closer, Clara braced herself for what was to come. But in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. The bandits halted in their tracks as the Lakota warrior stood his ground. The sun had nearly disappeared beyond the horizon, and the dying light cast long shadows over the dusty trail. Clara's heart was racing, her breath shallow as she watched the scene unfold before her. She could hear the low murmur of the bandits, their horses pawing at the ground, uncertain now that the Lakota had positioned himself between them and Clara. His presence was like an immovable wall. The leader of the bandits, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, gave the warrior a cold stare, his hand hovering near his pistol. He was the first to speak. "Step aside, Indian," the bandit leader growled. "She's not yours to protect." The Lakota warrior didn't flinch. He simply looked back at Clara, his gaze steady, as if silently telling her to stay behind him. Clara had no idea who this man was or what had brought him here, but in that moment, she felt something stir within her, a flicker of hope, something she had long since thought was gone. The bandit leader's words were met with a silence that felt thick with tension. The other men behind him shifted on their horses, their hands twitching toward their guns, but no one made a move. "She is under my protection," the Lakota warrior spoke at last, his voice low, but it carried an undeniable authority. Clara's eyes widened. Did he mean it? Was he really going to fight them off for her? The bandit leader scoffed, clearly not taking the Lakota's words seriously. "You think you can take on all of us?" he sneered. "This is Dakota territory, and you're nothing but a savage." The Lakota's eyes flashed, but he remained calm. He was a man who had learned long ago that words were often pointless. Action spoke louder than anything else. In a swift movement, he drew his tomahawk and knife, his stance ready, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The leader of the bandits hesitated, his eyes darting between his men and the warrior before him. Clara could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression, but he wasn't about to back down. "We'll see how long you last," the bandit leader snarled, and with a signal, the rest of the men spurred their horses forward, pulling out their weapons. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She had nowhere to run, no time to think. The Lakota warrior's movements were a blur of precision as he met the first bandit head-on. His tomahawk slashed through the air, the sharp blade cutting through the night's silence with deadly grace. The first bandit fell from his horse with a cry, his weapon lost in the dust. The warrior didn't pause. He moved like a shadow, effortlessly dispatching the second bandit with a swift blow to the chest, his knife sinking deep into the man's ribs. The bandits were panicking now, realizing they had underestimated the warrior. Clara stood frozen, watching the battle unfold before her. The Lakota warrior fought with a calm, deadly focus. Each strike, each move, was calculated, designed to disable, not to kill. But the bandits weren't backing down. One of them lunged at him from the side, but the warrior's reflexes were too quick. He dodged, spinning around to face the man, and with a sharp motion, knocked the bandit to the ground with a swift kick to the chest. Clara watched, awestruck, as the warrior took on the remaining bandits, his every action flawless, his movements fluid and purposeful. It was as if he were born for this. As the last bandit fell, defeated and sprawled on the dirt, the Lakota warrior stood still, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His eyes never left Clara's. She stood there, breathless, her mind racing. She had seen the man fight with the ferocity of a storm, and yet, there was a quiet strength in his calm. She didn't know what to feel. Fear? Relief? Or something else entirely? The bandit leader, now on his knees, glanced up at the warrior with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You think you've won?" he spat, blood dripping from his lip. "We'll be back. And next time, you won't be so lucky." The Lakota didn't respond. He simply watched him, his face unreadable. "You're safe now," he finally said, his voice carrying a quiet, solemn tone. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Safe. The word felt foreign to her, as if it hadn't been a part of her world in years. She hadn't known what it was like to feel safe, not since her life had been torn apart by the weight of her father's debts. But now, in this moment, standing in the presence of this warrior, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long, a flicker of safety. The warrior turned to her, his eyes softening. "Come with me," he said. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no idea who this man was, or why he had come for her. But in that moment, with the bandits defeated and the night still hanging heavy around them, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long, the possibility of hope. The Lakota warriors stood silent for a moment, the dust settling around them as Clara tried to process what had just happened. The bandits were gone, their bodies sprawled across the ground like discarded playthings. The warrior had taken them down with such skill, such grace, that it was almost as if he had been born for this very moment. Clara could hardly believe what she had witnessed. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the tension of the battle still hanging in the air. The warrior's gaze never wavered from hers, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara's heart still pounded in her chest, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why had he saved her? She had known men like the bandits, cruel, heartless men, but she had never known a man like him. His calm demeanor, his unwavering protection, it was something entirely different. Clara swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling small compared to the enormity of what had just happened. The warrior nodded, his face still as stone, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke volumes. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her made her feel as though he had already made up his mind about something. He turned away then, scanning the horizon as if making sure the danger was truly gone. Clara followed his gaze, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. Even though the bandits were defeated, she knew there were more out there, more threats lurking in the wilds of Dakota territory. Her father's debts still hung over her, and the outlaw leader, Jake "Blackjack" Morrison, would not let her go so easily. You should come with me, the Lakota warrior finally said, his voice low, but carrying a sense of certainty. Clara looked at him, her brow furrowing. Where are we going? She asked. He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. To a place where you will be safe, he replied simply. Clara hesitated, her mind racing with the implications of his words. Safe. It was a word she hadn't heard in a long time. A word that had seemed foreign to her, like a dream she could never quite reach. The past few months had been nothing but a whirlwind of fear, betrayal, and uncertainty. She had run from her father's debts, from a forced marriage to a man she feared more than anything, and now she was faced with the possibility of starting over, of finding a place where she could breathe freely again. But what did it really mean to be safe? And what did it mean to be in the presence of a man like him? A man who had just taken down a group of bandits without breaking a sweat. A man who had stood before them without hesitation and had not faltered. He was something different, something she couldn't quite understand. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not some helpless woman in need of saving. The warrior turned to face her fully then, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were seeing her for the first time. You are not helpless, he said, his voice steady. But you are not alone. And you will not face this alone. Clara felt something stir inside her then, something deep and unshakable. She had spent so long fighting to survive on her own, to prove that she could stand on her own 2 feet, but now, in this moment, she felt something shift. The weight of the world, the burden of her past, seemed to lift, if only for a brief moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt as though she could let go. She looked into his eyes, those dark eyes that held so many secrets, and she knew, without a doubt, that he was offering her something far greater than just safety. He was offering her a chance at redemption, a chance to start anew. But even as the thought took root in her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more at play here, more than just a simple offer of protection. There was something about this man, something that she couldn't quite place, that made her wonder if she was about to step into a world far darker and more dangerous than the one she had just escaped. Where will you take me? She asked, her voice steady now, filled with determination. The warrior didn't answer immediately. He simply turned, his eyes scanning the horizon once more. The sky was darkening, the stars beginning to appear, scattered like diamonds across the night. To a place where you will find what you need, he said cryptically, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Clara wasn't sure what that meant, but she knew one thing. She had no choice but to follow him. She couldn't go back to the life she had left behind, to the chains that had held her in place for so long. She had to keep moving forward. And for now, this warrior, this man who had stepped between her and certain death, was the only guide she had. The fire crackled as Clara sat by the warmth, the first real warmth she had felt in what seemed like an eternity. She had followed the Lakota warrior for hours, moving swiftly through the dense trees of the Dakota wilderness. The night had fallen quickly, the moon rising high above them, casting its pale light across the land. Clara's mind was still reeling from the events of the day, the bandits, the fight, and the man who had stepped in to protect her without a second thought. Now, sitting by the fire, she could hear the distant calls of animals in the night, the howling of wolves and the rustle of the trees as the wind moved through them. The Lakota warrior was tending to the horses, his movements methodical and calm. He had said little since the fight, only a few words here and there, mostly practical, but Clara could feel the weight of his presence. There was an air about him, a quiet strength, that seemed to fill the space between them. She watched him for a moment, the firelight dancing across his features. His face was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes, a deep sorrow, perhaps, or a lifetime of unspoken stories, that made her curious. She wanted to ask him about it, about the life he had lived and why he had chosen to intervene, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Instead, she turned her attention back to the fire, its warmth comforting her in a way that nothing had in a long time. The sound of footsteps approaching broke the silence. Clara looked up to see the Lakota warrior standing near the fire, his dark eyes locking with hers. "We'll be safe here for now," he said, his voice low but steady. Clara nodded, though her mind was still racing. She had never imagined she would find herself in this situation, alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. Yet there was something about him that made her trust him, something in his presence that made her feel like she wasn't as alone as she had been just hours before. "Thank you," Clara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "For saving me." The Lakota warrior didn't respond immediately. He simply sat down across from her, his posture relaxed but alert. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the soft rustling of the wind. Clara shifted uncomfortably, not sure what to say next. She had never been good at talking to strangers, especially men, but this man was different. He was more than just a protector. There was something about him that she couldn't quite put into words. Finally, the Lakota warrior broke the silence. "You do not need to thank me," he said, his voice still steady. "It is my duty to protect those in need." Clara looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Duty?" she repeated, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "But you don't know me. I'm just a woman, a stranger to you. Why would you risk your life for me?" The warrior's eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. "Not just a woman. A person. We are all connected in this world, and when one of us is in need, it is my responsibility to help." Clara was silent for a moment, her thoughts turning inward. His words struck something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The desire to belong, to be cared for, to know that she mattered. It was something she had been missing ever since her life had been torn apart by her father's debts, her forced marriage, and her desperate flight from the life she had known. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was running, but I didn't know where I was going. I thought I'd never be free." The Lakota warrior nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Freedom is not something that can be given. It is something you must take for yourself." Clara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "But how? How do I take it?" The warrior's gaze hardened slightly, his jaw tightening. "By accepting who you are. By accepting your strength. You are not weak, Clara. You are stronger than you think." Clara felt a rush of emotions wash over her at his words. She had never thought of herself as strong, weak, desperate, scared, yes, but not strong. And yet, something in her stirred. She had survived so much, had fought so hard to get this far. Maybe, just maybe, she was stronger than she had realized. The warrior rose to his feet, his movements fluid and precise. "Rest now. Tomorrow, we will move on," he said. Clara watched him for a moment, then nodded. She didn't know what the future held or where this strange journey would take her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The warrior had shown her a kind of strength she had never known, and for that, she was grateful. She lay down by the fire, the warmth of it wrapping around her like a blanket. As she closed her eyes, she could hear the warrior's steady breathing, the sound of him keeping watch over her as the night stretched on. And in that moment, for the first time, Clara felt truly safe, not just from the dangers outside, but from the fear that had always lived inside her. The morning sun broke through the trees, casting long beams of light across the forest floor. Clara awoke to the soft sound of birds calling in the distance, the air crisp and fresh with the scent of pine and earth. She stretched, still feeling the weight of exhaustion from the journey, but something was different today. The fear that had gripped her for so long was starting to lift, replaced by a sense of calm she had not known in years. She sat up slowly, brushing the sleep from her eyes, and looked around. The Lakota warrior was already awake, crouching by the horses, his movements purposeful as he prepared for the day. Clara watched him for a moment, noting the way he worked, efficiently, without hurry, as if the world around him could wait. She couldn't help but wonder what his life had been like before all this. How had he come to be the man he was now? Strong, silent, a protector of those in need. She had heard stories about the Lakota people, about their warriors and their ways, but none of those stories had prepared her for the man who stood before her. He was different, stoic, yet kind, fierce, yet gentle. She could feel the pull of his presence, the way he seemed to command the space around him without uttering a word. "You are quiet this morning." The warrior's voice broke into her thoughts. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. He had finished tending to the horses and was now standing, looking at her with a calm expression. "Just thinking," she said, her voice soft. "About what?" he asked, his tone curious but still measured. Clara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain what was in her mind. "About everything. About where we're going, about what happens next. I've never had someone protect me like this before. The warrior nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. It is my duty, he said simply. Clara looked down, unable to meet his eyes for a moment. But why me? She asked quietly. Why do you care about protecting me? The warrior's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something unspoken. He stepped closer, his presence steady and reassuring. Because you are not alone, he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. We all need someone to stand beside us. It is not weakness to accept help. It is strength. Clara absorbed his words, feeling their weight settle in her chest. She had spent so many years running, hiding from the life that had been forced upon her, that she had never allowed herself to truly understand what it meant to have someone by her side, to be protected. The idea was foreign to her, almost unnatural. But here, in this moment, with this man who had risked his life for hers, she was starting to understand. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what comes next, or how to even begin again. The warrior watched her for a long moment, his expression softening just slightly. You begin by moving forward, he said. You take each step as it comes. You don't need to have all the answers. You only need to keep moving. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by the emotion she could no longer contain. For so long, she had fought to survive, to keep going no matter the cost. But now, for the first time in a long time, she was allowing herself to feel, to hope, and it scared her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The warrior simply nodded, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel safe, even in the face of everything she had been through. We should go, he said, turning toward the horses. We have a long journey ahead. Clara nodded, standing slowly, her legs still stiff from the long hours of travel. As she moved toward the horses, she felt a sense of purpose stir within her. The past was behind her, and while it would always be a part of who she was, it no longer had control over her. She was moving forward, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. As they set off into the wilderness once more, Clara glanced at the warrior, the man who had become her protector, and she realized that this journey was just beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she would face it with him by her side. And that, for now, was enough. The journey was slower than Clara had expected, but the Lakota warrior moved with a quiet assurance, navigating the rugged terrain with ease, as if the land itself whispered its secrets to him. Clara had never been this deep into the wilderness before, never imagined she would be so far from civilization. The path they followed was little more than a trail, winding through dense forests and over rocky hills. Clara tried to keep up, her legs aching from the strain, but every time she faltered, the warrior was there, his hand steadying her. He did not speak much, but the few words he did say were always direct, filled with purpose. The silence between them grew comfortable, though Clara could not shake the feeling that there was more to this man than he let on. She caught glimpses of his past in his eyes, moments of pain, of something unspoken that lurked just beneath the surface. She wondered about his life before this journey, before he had crossed her path. Had he always been a protector? Had he always lived by the warrior's code? Or had something happened that had driven him to this solitary path? Why did you come for me? Clara asked one evening, as they rested by a small fire. The warrior had been quiet all day, his focus on the trail ahead, but now, as he sat across from her, she found herself looking for answers. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, the warrior did not respond. Instead, he tended to the fire, adjusting the logs as the flames flickered. Clara waited, unsure if he would answer, but when he finally spoke, his voice was soft. I have lost much, he said quietly. But I have also learned that the journey is not just about surviving. It is about finding purpose. Helping others is a part of that. Clara processed his words, feeling the weight of them settle in her chest. She had been running for so long, trying to outrun her past, but now, with this man beside her, she was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to life than survival. Do you think I can start over? She asked, the vulnerability in her voice evident. The warrior did not immediately answer, but when he did, his words were steady and firm. You can start over, but it will not be easy. It will take time and strength. But you have both. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat at his words. She had spent so many years trying to prove to herself that she could stand on her own, that she could survive, but here, with him, she realized that maybe she didn't have to do it alone. Maybe there was a place for her in this world where she didn't have to fight every day just to keep breathing. The next few days passed quietly, the rhythm of their journey soothing in its simplicity. They ate meals over small fires, talked little but with meaning when they did, and traveled under the vast, open sky. Clara found herself growing stronger, her body adapting to the challenges of the wilderness. But it was the quiet moments with the warrior that she found most comforting. In his presence, she felt the peace she had longed for, the quiet assurance that she was not alone. One afternoon, as they made their way through a dense thicket, Clara stumbled on a rock, losing her balance and nearly falling. Before she could react, the warrior was there, his hand steadying her once again. She looked up at him, surprised by how effortlessly he had caught her. "You are stronger than you think," he said, his voice low and calm. Clara felt a warmth spread through her at his words. She wasn't sure what it was, his presence, his confidence in her, or something else, but she felt a surge of something inside her. It was the first time in a long time that she felt like she could stand tall, like maybe, just maybe, she was capable of more than she had ever given herself credit for. The days blended into each other as they continued their journey. The terrain grew harsher, the weather colder, but with each step, Clara felt herself growing more resilient. She began to understand the warrior's ways, learning to read the signs of the land, the patterns of the animals, the subtle shifts in the wind. She was no longer a frightened girl running from her past. She was becoming someone new, someone capable. But even as she grew stronger, there were moments when doubt crept in. What would happen when they reached their destination? Would the warrior still be there? Would she be able to find a place for herself in this new world? Clara had so many questions, but each time she looked at the warrior, she felt something stir within her, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way home. They reached a small clearing late one afternoon, and the warrior stopped, turning to her. "This is where we part ways," he said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something deeper in his tone. Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, suddenly afraid. The warrior met her gaze, his eyes softening. "You have learned much on this journey. You are ready now. You must walk your own path." Clara felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of fear and sadness. She had never imagined this journey would end, but here it was, the moment she had both dreaded and hoped for. "But I don't want to be alone," she whispered, her voice trembling. The warrior's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his hand briefly resting on her shoulder. "You are never truly alone. You carry everything you need within you." Clara nodded, though the words still felt heavy. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. The warrior had given her something invaluable, a new beginning. And that was enough for now. The warrior's words lingered in Clara's mind long after he had turned and disappeared into the dense forest. "You must walk your own path." She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads, but the path ahead was clouded in uncertainty. The warrior had given her the tools, the strength, and the belief in herself that she hadn't realized she was missing. And now, she was left with the choice to continue on her own, to forge a future that was hers to shape. Clara stared at the spot where he had stood, the weight of the decision settling heavily in her chest. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this felt different. This was more than just survival. It was about claiming a future she had never thought possible. She gathered herself and turned toward the trail ahead. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the landscape. The world was quiet, almost too quiet, but Clara couldn't let fear hold her back anymore. She had come so far, both physically and emotionally, and she wouldn't stop now. The next few days were filled with quiet reflection. Clara traveled at her own pace, stopping only when she needed rest. As she moved through the wilderness, she found herself looking at the world differently. The trees seemed taller, the air fresher, and the sky wider. She had learned to read the signs of the land, the way the birds moved, the way the wind shifted, the way the earth felt beneath her feet. It was strange, but she felt more in tune with the world around her than she ever had before. She wasn't sure if it was the warrior's teachings or something deeper within her, but for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she belonged. Yet, there were moments when doubt would creep in. She thought of the life she had left behind, the debts, the fear, the constant running. She thought of the man she had been forced to marry, Jake Blackjack Morrison, and the life he had promised her. The memory of his cruel face and his cold eyes made her stomach twist. She had escaped him, but what would happen if he came looking for her? What if he sent his men after her, as they had done so many times before? The thought was enough to send a shiver down her spine. But then, Clara would remind herself of what the warrior had said. You are stronger than you think. She didn't need to keep running. She didn't need to be afraid anymore. She had taken the first step toward freedom. That was something no one could take away from her. A few days later, Clara arrived at a small river. The water flowed peacefully, its surface reflecting the clear sky above. She paused at the edge, dipping her fingers into the cool water. It felt like a small blessing, the river offering her a moment of peace. As she sat by the water's edge, her mind wandered back to the warrior. She still didn't know much about him, but she wondered where he had gone, what his life had been like. Had he always been a protector? Or had something happened to him that had shaped him into the man he was? She knew he was more than just a warrior. He was a man who had seen things, experienced loss, and understood what it meant to fight not just for survival, but for something greater. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the river. It was easy to get lost in the peace of the moment, but the world wasn't always so calm. She had to keep moving, keep her guard up, and stay vigilant. She had learned that lesson the hard way. The river had its own course, but it wasn't always predictable. Just as she had learned to trust the land, Clara knew she had to trust herself now more than ever. The warrior had given her a gift, a sense of purpose, a belief in her own strength. But it was up to her to carry it forward. Clara stood and continued along the riverbank, her footsteps steady and determined. The journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. And with each step, she felt herself growing stronger. The past was behind her, and though it would always be a part of who she was, she wouldn't let it define her. She had taken control of her own future. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Clara felt ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone. She had herself, and that was enough. The days that followed felt like a blur to Clara. She had made it this far, but something was still unsettled within her, a quiet anxiety that lingered no matter how far she traveled or how much ground she covered. She had left the man she feared behind, but there were whispers of his reach, of his power. Jake Blackjack Morrison was no ordinary outlaw. Clara knew him to be ruthless, and even though she had escaped him once, she couldn't shake the feeling that he would come for her. He would hunt her down, no matter where she went. The memory of his cold eyes, the grip of his cruel hand, haunted her still. And now, out here in the wilderness, far from the life she had known, she realized just how vulnerable she truly was. There were moments when she found herself questioning the choices she had made. Had she been right to leave everything behind? Would she ever be able to truly escape her past? The wind rustled through the trees as Clara trudged along the path. She had been walking for hours, her thoughts consumed by doubt, when a sound broke through the silence, the distant cry of an animal, eerie and haunting. Clara paused, listening intently. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the sound of something familiar. It was something else. She crouched down, her senses alert. She had learned to trust her instincts on this journey, and they were telling her something was wrong. She glanced around, the trees casting long, dark shadows across the ground. She could feel eyes on her, though she saw no one. Clara's grip tightened around the hilt of the knife the warrior had given her before he left. The same knife that had been with her for every step of this journey. Her heart raced as the sound grew closer. It was a soft, almost imperceptible rustle, followed by a low growl. Clara froze, every muscle tensed. She knew she couldn't outrun whatever was out there. She couldn't outfight it either, not on her own. She wasn't sure what to do, but she couldn't just stand there, waiting for it to come for her. With a deep breath, she rose to her feet, carefully scanning the area around her. She was no longer the frightened woman she had once been. She had learned to survive in this wilderness, to read the signs, to understand the land. But this felt different. The sound grew louder, and Clara's eyes caught a glimpse of movement to her left. She turned sharply, her pulse quickening. A large figure emerged from the shadows. At first, she thought it was a bear, but as it stepped forward, she realized it was much more dangerous than that. It was a mountain lion, its eyes glinting with hunger. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped backward slowly. The animal's growl rumbled through the air, the sound deep and menacing. She gripped the knife tighter, knowing it wasn't enough. It wasn't going to be enough. The mountain lion took another step forward, its muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat. Clara's mind raced. She had learned about the ways of animals in this land. But this was no ordinary encounter. This was a predator, calculating, patient, ready to strike. Clara's body felt like it was frozen in place. Her legs were heavy, as though they were stuck in the ground. Every instinct told her to run, but she knew better. Running would only make it worse. She couldn't outrun a predator. But just as the mountain lion prepared to lunge, there was a sudden movement to her right. The warrior. Clara hadn't seen him approach. But there he was, as though he had emerged from the very earth itself. His tomahawk was already in his hand, his posture unwavering. The mountain lion paused, sensing the new presence. The warrior stepped forward, his gaze locked on the animal. Clara could see the calm determination in his eyes, a look she had come to recognize in him over the past few days. This was not fear. This was the quiet confidence of someone who had lived and survived in the wild for as long as he had. Without a word, he moved toward the mountain lion, his steps precise, calculated. The animal growled again, its body tensing as it prepared to attack, but the warrior was faster. In one swift motion, he swung the tomahawk with deadly accuracy. The mountain lion let out a final, guttural cry before it collapsed to the ground. Clara stood, frozen, as the warrior slowly lowered his weapon, the tension in the air dissipating. The warrior turned to her, his expression unchanged, but there was a faint glimmer of something in his eyes. "You are safe," he said quietly. Clara didn't know what to say. She had witnessed something that had taken her by complete surprise. The warrior had saved her once again. She started, but the words faltered in her throat. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice shaking. The warrior gave a small nod, his gaze returning to the fallen mountain lion. "You are learning," he said, his voice low and steady. "But you must always be aware. The wilderness is not kind." Clara looked at him, her heart still racing from the encounter. She had felt the true meaning of fear in those moments, and she realized just how much she still had to learn. But she also realized that she wasn't alone anymore. The warrior had not just saved her physically. He had shown her something deeper, the strength to face the dangers ahead, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to wait. She had a long way to go, but with him by her side, she felt more certain than ever that she could face whatever came next. Clara stood motionless, her heart still pounding from the confrontation with the mountain lion. The warrior's calmness in the face of danger was both unsettling and comforting at the same time. He had saved her, again, without a second thought, without hesitation. She watched as he approached the fallen animal, his movements slow and deliberate as he inspected it, making sure the threat was truly over. The silence between them was heavy, but Clara didn't mind. She had learned that in the warrior's presence, words were rarely necessary. His actions spoke louder than anything he could say. After a moment, he looked up at her, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You handled yourself well," he said, his voice low, almost approving. Clara blinked in surprise. "I didn't do anything. You were the one who," she trailed off, not sure how to put into words what she had just witnessed. The warrior simply nodded, acknowledging her words without needing to elaborate. "We are stronger together," he said, as if that was all that needed to be said. His words resonated with Clara in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about the bond they were forming, the silent understanding between them that they were no longer alone in this wilderness. They had each other's backs, no matter the danger. Clara felt a wave of gratitude, mixed with something else she couldn't quite name. A deep, abiding trust in the man who had not only protected her, but also shown her that she was capable of more than she had ever realized. The warrior stood up, wiping the blood from his weapon before sheathing it with a practiced motion. "We move on," he said simply, and without waiting for a response, he began to walk, his pace steady and unhurried. Clara followed him, her feet moving on there, on as if the decision had already been made for her. The warrior had shown her what it meant to survive, to endure, but more than that, he had shown her what it meant to live with purpose. They walked through the wilderness, their path winding through dense forests and over rocky hills. The days seemed to blend together in a steady rhythm, rising with the sun, walking until it set, and then setting up camp in the quiet of the night. Clara found herself becoming more attuned to the land around her. She could read the way the wind shifted, the subtle signs in the forest that indicated danger or safety. It was as if the wilderness was speaking to her, and for the first time, she was listening. One evening, as they made camp near a quiet stream, Clara sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker in the growing darkness. The warrior was silent as always, tending to their gear and the horses, but tonight, Clara noticed a shift in him. He was more distant, his movements more deliberate, as if he was lost in thought. She knew better than to ask questions, but curiosity tugged at her. She had come to trust him, not just for his protection, but for the wisdom he offered in his quiet way. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying the weight of the question. The warrior paused for a moment, his gaze flicking toward her. There was something in his eyes that made Clara's breath catch, something she couldn't place. "I am," he said after a beat, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Clara didn't press. She had learned to respect the silence that surrounded him, but she couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. What did it mean for him, to live the way he did, constantly moving, constantly on guard? Was he running from something too? She couldn't imagine it, the life he had lived, the things he had seen. He was a warrior, a man of strength and resolve, but even the strongest men had their limits, didn't they? Clara shook off the thought and looked back at the fire, letting the warmth wash over her. The night was growing colder, the air carrying the scent of pine and earth. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of the night, but Clara felt a strange peace in the stillness. For the first time since she had set out on this journey, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The warrior's presence beside her, his quiet strength, gave her a sense of security she hadn't known she needed. She could still remember the fear that had gripped her when she had first run, when she had felt so alone, so helpless. But now, as she sat by the fire with him, she knew that she had come a long way. She wasn't the same person who had fled from her past. She was stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. The warrior had shown her how to survive in the wilderness, but more importantly, he had shown her how to survive within herself. She had learned to trust not only him, but also her own instincts. "We move on tomorrow," the warrior said, his voice bringing her back to the present. Clara nodded, though she knew that wherever they went, she would be ready. She was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. Whatever the future held, she was prepared to face it with him by her side. The road ahead was uncertain, but Clara had come to realize that as long as they were together, she didn't have to face it alone. And that thought brought her more peace than she had ever known. The days grew colder as Clara and the warrior continued their journey through the rugged terrain. The sun dipped lower each day, and the crisp autumn air reminded Clara that winter was not far behind. They had made camp near a small stream, its water flowing clear and cold over smooth rocks. The sound of the stream was soothing, a steady rhythm that made the night feel less lonely. Clara sat by the fire, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what had passed and what was yet to come. The warrior was across the fire, tending to the horses, his movements calm and purposeful. His quiet strength had become a constant in her life, something she had come to rely on in ways she didn't fully understand. As the fire crackled, Clara found herself thinking about the past, about the life she had left behind. She had been running for so long, escaping a future she feared, but now she was here, in the wilds of Dakota, surrounded by nothing but trees, mountains, and the quiet presence of the man across the fire. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of fear pressing down on her. The warrior had given her something she hadn't known she needed, a sense of purpose, a feeling that, even in the vastness of the wilderness, she was not truly alone. She looked up at the warrior, his face shadowed by the firelight, and she wondered about his life. What had brought him to this point? Why had he chosen to help her? He had never said much about himself. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had shown her how to survive in a world that was often indifferent to those who couldn't protect themselves. He had shown her strength, not just in battle, but in silence. Clara had come to realize that his quietness wasn't a sign of detachment. It was his way of sharing his strength with others. She had learned so much from him, not just about the wilderness, but about herself. She was stronger than she had known, capable of more than she had ever imagined. The warrior stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands, and turned toward her. "We move tomorrow," he said, his voice steady as always. Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure where they were headed. The path ahead remained unclear, but it didn't matter. She had learned that it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, the steps taken along the way. And with him by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The next morning, they packed up quickly, the routine of setting up and breaking down camp becoming second nature. Clara felt more at ease with each passing day, her body growing stronger from the physical demands of their journey. But it was her mind that had changed the most. She had begun to see the world through a different lens. The trees, the rivers, the animals, they were no longer just obstacles or dangers to be avoided. They were part of a greater system, a delicate balance of life that she was learning to understand. As they traveled, the warrior taught her how to track animals, how to read the signs of the land, how to move silently through the trees. He didn't speak much about himself, but he shared his knowledge freely, his lessons simple but profound. Clara had come to respect him not just as a warrior, but as a teacher, someone who saw potential in her that she hadn't seen in herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara sat by the fire, watching the flames dance in the growing darkness. The warrior was silent, as always, but there was a calm about him now that made her feel safe. She had learned to trust him, not just with her life, but with her fears, her doubts, her uncertainties. He had never asked for anything in return. His protection, his guidance, had been given without expectation. She realized, for the first time in a long while, that she wasn't just surviving. She was living in a way that was freer, truer, than she had ever thought possible. The wind stirred the leaves around them, the sound of the trees whispering in the night. Clara looked up at the warrior, who was staring into the distance, as if he were listening to something beyond the reach of her hearing. She couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking, what he was feeling. He had shown her so much, but there was still so much about him she didn't understand. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence between them. The warrior looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "We keep moving," he said simply. "There is always a next step." Clara nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The future was uncertain, but the warrior had shown her that it didn't have to be a source of fear. The future was something to be faced, step by step, with courage and resolve. And with that, Clara felt the weight of her past lighten, as if each step forward was one more burden lifted. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. She had the warrior's protection, his strength, and his wisdom. But more than that, she had the courage to face the unknown, the strength to stand on her own. Together, they would face whatever came next, one step at a time. The journey had become routine for Clara. They woke with the sun, moved with purpose through the wilds, and set up camp as darkness fell. The warrior, as always, was a quiet presence, offering few words but steady guidance. Clara had grown accustomed to the silence, learning more each day from his actions than from anything he could say. She felt herself becoming more attuned to the world around her, the way the land shifted with the seasons, how the animals moved in patterns, how the weather dictated the rhythm of their days. The wilderness was no longer something to fear. It was something to understand, to respect. But despite her growing confidence in the land, there were still moments when the weight of her past returned, uninvited and unwelcome. The fear of Jake Blackjack Morrison never fully left her. It gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, a constant reminder that the man who had once controlled her life would not let her go so easily. She had run far, but how far would she have to go before he stopped hunting her? The warrior must have sensed her unease, though he never asked about her past. He had his own demons, she knew that much. But even in his silence, there was an understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that they would both carry their burdens without needing to share the details. That evening, Clara found herself at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the vast expanse of the wilderness. The view was breathtaking: rolling hills, dark forests, and a sky so wide it felt like the world itself was endless. It was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming. She realized then how small she felt in this vast, untamed world. Alone, yet not alone. She had the warrior with her, and he had shown her what it meant to survive, but there was still a part of her that longed for something more. A place where she could finally breathe, where she could feel like she belonged. The warrior had kept his distance, as he always did, but she felt his presence beside her, steady and unwavering. He hadn't asked for anything from her, had not pushed her to speak about the past or to share the burdens she carried. But Clara felt the weight of it pressing on her chest, and she knew that she couldn't keep running forever. She had to face her past, or it would keep haunting her. As if sensing her thoughts, the warrior spoke. "We stop tomorrow," he said, his voice calm and steady. Clara turned to him, surprised by the words. "Stop?" she asked, her voice catching slightly. "Why?" The warrior glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You are ready to face what comes next. It's time to stop running." His words hit her harder than she expected. It was true. She knew it was. She had been running for so long, and now, standing here, she felt like she had reached the edge of something. The edge of her journey. The edge of her freedom. But that freedom came at a cost. The warrior wasn't just giving her safety. He was giving her the chance to confront the truth, to face the life she had left behind. And that scared her more than anything. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Clara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. The warrior didn't respond at first, but after a moment, he spoke, his words measured. "You are stronger than you think. You've come this far. You are ready." Clara swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear that threatened to rise in her throat. The warrior's words meant something. They always did. She looked out over the land again, the weight of the decision settling over her. She had to face Jake Blackjack Morrison. She had to face the man who had tried to break her, the man who had once controlled her life. The thought filled her with dread, but also something else, a flicker of determination. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't live in fear forever. It was time to confront her past, no matter how painful it might be. The warrior, as always, offered no more words. He simply turned and began to prepare for the night, his movements efficient and purposeful. Clara stood for a long moment, watching him. He had given her so much, his protection, his strength, his guidance. But now, it was up to her to take the next step. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew that, whatever came next, she would face it with him by her side. They would face it together. The wind picked up, swirling the dust at her feet, and Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool, crisp air. Tomorrow, they would stop. Tomorrow, she would face her past. And tomorrow, she would stop running. The next morning, Clara woke early, the cold air biting at her skin as she stepped out from beneath the covers. The sky above was heavy with clouds, a storm threatening to roll in. She glanced at the warrior, who was already moving, his steady movements suggesting he was always prepared for whatever came next. They had stopped in a small clearing near the edge of the forest, far from the usual trails. Clara's heart pounded as she thought about the decision that lay ahead. Today would be the day. Today, they would stop running. She had been so sure of herself when she first fled, convinced that she could outrun her past. But now, as she stood there, her resolve began to waver. What if confronting him, the man who had stolen so much from her, was too much? What if she wasn't strong enough? The warrior's calm voice broke through her thoughts. "You are ready," he said simply, as if he could sense the storm brewing inside her. Clara met his gaze, her heart thumping in her chest. She had come to trust him, perhaps more than anyone in her life. He had taught her how to survive, how to face each challenge without fear. And now, he was telling her she was ready. Ready to face the man who had controlled her life. Ready to face the future, no matter how uncertain. She nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. They packed their things in silence, the weight of the moment heavy on their shoulders. As Clara strapped her gear to her back, she couldn't shake the feeling that today would change everything. The journey had brought her to this point, but the battle within her, the fear, the doubt, had not yet been won. They began walking, their steps measured, their path leading them toward the unknown. The warrior's presence beside her was a constant, a reminder that she wasn't alone. But even so, Clara couldn't help the fear that crept into her mind with every step. What would she do when she came face to face with Morrison? Could she stand her ground? Could she fight back? The memories of his cold, calculating eyes flashed in her mind. He was dangerous, and she had no idea what lengths he might go to in order to reclaim what he believed was his. They traveled through thick woods and across rocky hills, the terrain becoming more difficult as the storm rolled in. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure if it was the cold or the fear. It felt like the storm was coming for them, pushing them toward their inevitable confrontation. As they made camp that night, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The warrior, ever vigilant, had already set up the perimeter, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. Clara didn't ask him about it. She could feel the weight of his silence, the knowledge that danger was always just beyond the horizon. As they sat by the fire, Clara felt a moment of peace amidst the chaos. The storm raged around them, but they were safe for now. The warrior's presence was a comfort, but it also made her question what would happen once they reached their destination. The night stretched on, the fire crackling, and Clara's thoughts drifted back to Morrison. She thought of the way he had once looked at her, as if she were nothing more than a possession to be controlled, a pawn to be moved around. She thought of his threats, his promises of punishment. It had always been about power with him. And now, as the warrior sat across from her, silent and strong, Clara realized that she had the power to take control of her own life. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was no longer the woman who cowered in fear. She had learned to fight, to survive. And though the road ahead would not be easy, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The storm continued to rage outside, but Clara felt a fire burn within her. She was ready to face the man who had held her captive in fear for so long. And, more importantly, she was ready to face herself. With each step forward, she was reclaiming her life, her strength, her future. The warrior looked at her then, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, but the weight of his gaze told her everything she needed to know. He believed in her. And in that moment, Clara realized that belief was all she needed. Tomorrow, they would face the man who had stolen her freedom, but it would no longer be a fight for survival. It would be a fight for her future. She was ready. The morning broke with an unsettling quiet. Clara woke before the sun. The storm of the night now passed, leaving behind a crisp, cold air that made the forest seem stiller than usual. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadows and echoes of her past. The weight of the journey ahead pressed down on her chest, and as she rose to her feet, she felt the familiar pull of uncertainty. But this time, it was different. She had made up her mind. Today, everything would change. The warrior was already awake, preparing the horses in silence, his movements calm and precise. Clara approached him quietly, watching as he checked the gear one final time. He noticed her presence but didn't speak, allowing the stillness to hang between them. It wasn't awkward. It was simply how they had come to be, comfortable in each other's company without the need for words. After a moment, Clara spoke, her voice steady. "Are you ready?" The warrior looked up at her, his dark eyes meeting hers with a depth of understanding that made her heart skip a beat. He had never told her much about himself, but she had come to know the quiet strength in his presence, the way he carried the weight of his past without burdening others. He had been her guide, her protector, but more than that, he had been the steady force that kept her moving forward. "I am," he said simply, his voice low but resolute. They moved forward as one, the trail before them winding through dense trees and up a rocky path. Clara's heart raced with every step, knowing that soon they would come to the place where she would have to face her past. The warrior led the way with his usual calm, never once faltering in his steps. Clara followed, each footstep taking her closer to the man she had feared, to the life she had fled. As they neared the edge of the forest, Clara felt the tension in her body tighten. The familiar ache of dread crept up her spine as she imagined what lay ahead. She had spent so many years running, but now, standing at the precipice, she had no choice but to face the one thing she had avoided. Jake "Blackjack" Morrison. The thought of him brought back memories, dark, haunting memories that threatened to overwhelm her. He had been cruel, manipulative, and violent, a man who cared only for control. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized just how much she had underestimated the weight of what was to come. But as she glanced at the warrior walking beside her, something shifted inside her. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to face this by herself. They would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt before: hope. Hope that she could overcome the darkness that had shadowed her for so long. The warrior stopped just ahead, his posture tense as he surveyed the clearing ahead. Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Stay close," the warrior said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her hand instinctively resting on the knife at her side, the same knife the warrior had given her for protection. It had become a part of her, a symbol of her journey, her strength. They moved forward cautiously, the tension thick in the air. As they emerged from the trees, Clara's eyes locked onto the figure standing in the clearing. Jake "Blackjack" Morrison. He stood there, his back to them, as though he had been waiting for this moment. The years had not been kind to him. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, his once imposing presence now marred by the wear of time. But the coldness in his eyes remained the same. Clara's pulse quickened as the warrior stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on his weapon. "It's over, Morrison," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. Morrison turned slowly, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "So, you think you can stop me?" he sneered, his gaze flicking to Clara. "I always knew you'd come crawling back eventually." Clara stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected fear, but now, in this moment, she felt something different. She felt anger, but it wasn't just for herself. It was for all the women like her who had been controlled, manipulated, and hurt. This was her moment. "I'm not crawling back," Clara said, her voice firm and clear. "I'm done running." The warrior stepped forward, his presence like a shield around her. "You've lost," he said, his tone unyielding. Morrison's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes flicking between Clara and the warrior. "You think you've won?" he growled, his voice low with fury. But there was something in his eyes now, something that spoke of doubt, of fear. Clara realized then that the power he once held over her was nothing more than an illusion. She had been afraid of him for so long, but now she saw him for what he truly was: weak, afraid of losing control. "It's over," Clara repeated, stepping forward, her voice unwavering. "You have no power over me anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the weight of the years they had both spent living in fear. Morrison stood there, his face twisted with rage, but Clara didn't flinch. She stood tall, her shoulders square, her heart steady. This was her moment of freedom. She was no longer his to control, no longer his to hurt. The warrior beside her stood silent, a protector, but also a witness to the change in her. He didn't need to say anything. Clara had already won. The battle was over. Clara had finally found her freedom. And with that, she knew she was ready to walk into the future, unafraid and unbroken, ready for whatever came next.